Hello everyone, it's really my pleasure to welcome you all at Mathaf. And I will start by asking you all to put your phone on silence, please, so we are not interrupted. Can we screen the first, this is the introduction to the panel.
I use these sometimes to tell stories. Once upon a time, Kan ya Makan, like Scheherazade. In the Jahiliyyah, time before Islam, they call the ignorance. Poets used to string their verses up rhythmically like pearls, like the wet teeth in the smile of a beloved, like stars in the night. Hung up like the asterisks in the margins of my scripts. Black daisies on a highway leading to the crossroads where I guess I sell my soul to the devils.
So this is an introduction not only to the panel, but also to Sophia Al Maria, who I'm sure you know has an exhibition that opened last month at Mathaf, which is her first exhibition in Doha. It's an exhibition. So Sophia Al Maria is a Qatari American artist, writer, and filmmaker. She currently lives and works in London. Though her work spans many disciplines, including drawing, film, and screenwriting for TV, it is united by a preoccupation with the power of storytelling and myth, and in particular with imagining revisionist histories and alternative futures. I would like to move to Hend Fakhroo now. Perhaps we can view the extract that she chose, and then I'll introduce her biography.
It's dark in here. Can't see what I'm doing.
See this light? Go towards it.
ريم
انت كويس؟
الحمد لله، بس أنا خايف. تعبت يبا، تعبت.
أنا عارفة إنك تعبان بس أنت هتبقى كويس.
اسمعيني يبا، أنا ما أبي أطلع من هني على كفن، أبي أطلع لريولي.
مش هتطلع على كفل، ما تقولش كده.
أنا مطمن عليك يبا، ماني خايف عليكم، بس ساعديني أطلع من هني يا يبا، أبي أطلع من هني.
Hend Fakhroo is a Qatari Egyptian screenwriter and director. Her first short film, His Name, done in 2012, screened at various international festivals, including the Short Film Corner at the 67th Festival de Cannes. Her second film, The Waiting Room, which we just saw an extract from, done in 2016, was officially selected at more than 5 international film festivals, winning Best Drama at the Mexico International Film Festival. Recently, Hend has co-written a script for an American production starring an Oscar-nominated cast. The film will premiere in 2023. Hend is currently preparing to shoot her first feature film, Behind Closed Doors, early next year. She is also an actress and executive producer. And now we can see Dana's performance.
And you keep me warm and fed, but I have no sky to dive into, no vast and endless blue. Instead, these bars surround me, and I'm starting to resent you, old man, for holding me captive. Before you caught me, I'd visit you daily. Our special moments were savory. You'd offer seed, and I'd eat from your palm. Then in return, I'd sing you my songs. And we'd go on with the rest of our days, knowing that when tomorrow came, so too would another chance to say hello, connect a bit and grow the bond of trust, of love. I know why the caged bird sings, 'cause now I am one. And I miss the soft container of trees, the moody sky, the adrenaline of flight, the choice to come back to you, no matter how far I'd roam. I'd made a home of our friendship, and somehow you've made a prison of care. Oh, the weird thing is you brought me inside to spend my days with you, but most of the time you're not home. So what's a bird to do with all this time alone in a cage?
Dana Dajani is a Palestinian-American actress, poet, and presenter, known for her theatrical style of spoken word poetry, centered on feminine identity and themes of social justice. Dana has been invited to perform internationally, including at the Sydney Opera House and the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. Previously based in the UAE, Dana was honored for her contributions to the creative community, as well as her bilingual performances on screen and on stage. And she very recently moved to Doha, where she lives now with her husband and collaborator, visual artist Rami Anso. Maybe I would just start by saying that it's been, I think it is difficult to be like in presence of 3 artists, women, Arab, without mentioning the fact that they are women artists. And I was just thinking about this and trying to reflect, why can't we be together and not talk about these 2 basically, you know, somehow what represents in a way your identity or not. And I think it would be great to start talking about this. So your identity as women artists, both of you work and like belong to, I would say, to the Arab world and to the you know, I mean, you have lived and worked and also are partially American and somehow, you know, belong to other culture. And it would be just interesting if we can talk about this, like how do you make yourself a place, whether you are working in the Arab world or in other regions, and yeah.
Thank you, Zeina, for the introduction. I think there are moments where I felt abroad that as an Arab woman, as a Palestinian woman, it's my opportunity, sometimes it's my obligation to be a representative, to show a different picture than what the media tends to portray about Arab women. And at other times, I also want to break the stigma. So there's moments of being a representative, and there's moments of wanting to break the tradition and roles. Maybe that's a starting point, yeah?
Yes, thank you for the amazing introduction. I found that, yes, we are defined as being Arab women, and that there comes a certain expectation with that from, I guess, maybe the Western. For me, it would be a Western audience. Oh, sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. What I found is that there's a real thirst to know our stories. And I think that that's a huge responsibility. And the fact that we are so exposed, or we have had the opportunity to either we're half something, or we've lived overseas, or we studied overseas. I think we have the opportunity to be able to kind of bridge a little bit of those differences. So, yeah.
This is a subject that I think about a lot. I'm sure that perhaps all of us feel in some way frustrated by it. I had this conversation in an interview with Simone Fattal, who we had been invited to do this conversation because of our generational gap, but also because we were Arab women. And so we started the conversation about that, and the piece ended up being a sort of conversation about patriarchy. And my pronouns are she, her. And I keep those because I'm forever stamped by my experiences of being here in this region, and especially in Egypt. My experiences must have made me feel very like I have to be in solidarity with anybody who appears or presents as a woman. And it's a very different experience, and everybody has their own ways in which they deal with it. And that journey is continuing for me.
And Sophia, I mean, what does it mean to you to do this, to be presenting and working on this exhibition here in Doha? How different, I mean, did you think about it, and how much important it was that it was happening here?
I'm really excited for, if any of you haven't seen it, for you to go and see the show. A lot of you have worked on it, and you know the story of how much of a journey it has been. It was super important for me to do this show here. I would not have done a show like this anywhere else. I used to work in the museum before it opened. You can see it, this image right here is the old building in Medinat Khalifa, where I was archiving the library of Sheikh Hassan. And I've done museum shows around the world, but this is the only place in the world that I felt that I could enter and also have a conversation about the institution, about the history of the institution, with any kind of, I would not use the word authority, but with any kind of intimacy. And so it was very important to do the show here, and I'm very grateful to have done it, and I hope everyone will spend some time in there after this.
So maybe, I mean, we can also talk about a bit, your film, Hend, is very somehow autobiographical, and a lot of your works refer to your own experience, and again, this identity somehow. And maybe you can tell us why do you feel, or how, I mean, inspired you are to tell your story in a way?
Right. Well, I think that as a storyteller, what better story to tell than my own? That's, I'm the best person who can do that. But throughout my experience, whether it's with my dad being unwell in the hospital, or going through a divorce, or being a single mom, or going through a custody battle, or, you know, I've spoken to so many other women who feel very connected to the stories. I mean, we have such a shared experience. Their voices have to be heard, and I feel that I can do that through my work. And in a way, being able to share these stories is also universal, because a lot of these themes are, you know, we're not the only women who are single moms. We're not the only women who go through difficulties in relationships or with family members who are not well. I'm very interested in human interaction in our stories and how we connect on that level of just our humanity. And so that's why I write very personal narrative stories about people, basically.
And I was going to say it's even more relevant in your case, Dana. I mean, you have created your own mode of expression. So you even went further in doing your really own world. And
sure, I want to build off of what Hind mentioned, is the personal is universal. And then tying into this question about being an Arab woman artist, you know, on these stages, we get to share stories where for, you know, centuries and on, it's been men who've been holding the mic, it's been men who've been holding the pen, it's been men who've been sharing the stories and portraying women in certain contexts. And so, you know, more and more we're getting platforms to be able to come out and say, actually, this is my perspective, this is my experience. And when we do that, we connect with others who realize, it's not just your experience, that was my experience too, and this is my angle on that experience. And that's the power of stories, because when we realize that we all have this shared experience, there's no more othering, there's no more distance, there's no more unknown that keeps people isolated in their perceived separation, and we kind of start to shed that barrier, and we have compassion and we have empathy. And so yeah, I think the personal is universal, and I think that the pathway to connection is through the self, actually, and shedding all of the protective layers that stop us from being vulnerable and actually connecting.
And just to quickly add to that, I feel like if any of us here have seen movies or TV shows that we really like, or remember, or have had an impact on us somehow, it's because there is something that we either recognize in the character or relate to in some way, even if it's a Korean movie, you know? There's some kind of humanity, some kind of link.
I think the worm's eye view, I love that thought that, like, it's the direct route to an audience member. That's why I think a lot about POV in work, and how powerful adjusting the placement of the story, of the character, all of these things are political acts, and also the personal is political, and that's very much linked to the slide that I had, which is a whole story that I want to tell you all about at some point.
Do you want to share the slide?
Yeah, there's a slide of Little Birds, which is a television show. We were asked to bring something related to storytelling and to a story.
I don't think I gave them. Did you give it to me?
Oh,
We'll talk about
the slide.
Yeah.
In this slide, it's a poster for a television show that I wrote a few years ago. It was a 5-year process. There's an image. Close your eyes and imagine. There's an image of a white actress, Juno Temple, and then behind her, halfway, is Yumna Marwan. And this poster became a huge sticking point for the conversation around who was going to be represented and who was front and center of the story. I had written this television show to have a dual POV narrative. It was
American heiress, 1955, and a Moroccan woman named Sharifa, who's living in Tangier, right before Morocco is going to go back to Moroccan rule and the French are leaving. So I want to elucidate how from the moment that a project or a story is conceived and it enters into that structure of actual sort of mainstream networks, mainstream media, there is little violences and big violences that happen, from conversations around who will be featured on the poster, for example, what language it will be in, whose name is top on the call list, what the casting process will be like, who is financeable. All of these things are incredibly difficult to find your way through as a creative person with and keeping any kind of integrity. And I did not realize when I entered into that process how difficult it was going to be for me to make something that was anti-colonial, that was flipping the Orientalist perspective of the camera within a Western context. And that was a lesson that I learned the hard way, basically. So I'm very, very happy about the television and the films that are coming out of the region right now.
So it's interesting. I mean, you also worked with the first time I checked your website, Dana, it was funny. You had 2 CVs, one for you as a poet and one for you as a performer and like a presenter. And I mean, it's interesting to think about how do you, already in your work, you are writers, poets, but also performer, you do film scripts, you are an actress too. So, I mean, how do you go from, let's say, the words to performance, and how do you choose which story to tell in different ways?
Sure. So I studied theater. This was always my great passion. And a couple years after I graduated from university, I moved to Dubai, where my parents were, and the theater scene was very green there. And so I realized that, not only was the theater scene very green, there are no other, full-time professional actors at that time. So any production that I wanted to do had to be kind of after work hours. It was very difficult to fund. So I decided that I wanted to, never mind that, but when I was doing film work, also the scripts that were coming my way, again, were scripts I didn't resonate with. And I had written this manifesto after school that I wasn't going to take on any misogynist roles. I wasn't going to take on any Islamophobic roles. I made it very clear. I stipulated these are my values as an artist, and this is what I want to work within. So between the lack of a theater scene and between the unfulfilling roles I was offered in film, I decided to turn to poetry and kind of create one-woman vignettes, like smaller 4 or 5 minute pieces in character, bringing the theatricality on stage, performance, gesture, character, and voice, and tackling within those characters different themes. To come back to point of view, one of the first instances in which I did this was I was invited to write something for a Palestinian fundraising event in Dubai. And I didn't have anything that I felt, I really wanted to perform on the stage, so I started to write. And I had some limitations. I couldn't really talk at it, so I wanted to talk around it. And so I decided to create the character of a Hajjah who was born on the day of the Nakba and tell the story of Palestine through her experience. Because, we can argue different opinions and beliefs and perspectives, but you can't really argue with a story. You just kind of have to take in someone's story and accept it for what it is. So I used that mechanism to tell the story of Palestine in a way that nobody can argue and say, but that's wrong and that's right. Just this is her truth, this is her experience. And so that was the first instance that this form came out of combining theater and poetry. And ever since then, I've been between those two worlds.
But you also mentioned one day that you were perhaps in some places using a language to convey something. I mean, the story you can tell is probably not the same if you're using English or Arabic. And maybe this is interesting to discuss. I think that in all your, also Sophia and Hend, in your film, for instance, Hend, you have, it's bilingual. So sometimes, you know, they speak Arabic, sometimes English, and Sophia in your films and work as well. So I mean, I would like to talk about the language and how do you, again, choose to use Arabic or English, and to whom, you know, how do you use it actually? Is it a power? Is it a...
I'm very glad that you asked this. I'm going to answer the question in English. There's this very famous saying, an Arab is a person whose mother tongue is Arabic. Gamal Abdel Nasser used to say that in his various pan-Arabist speeches. And I disagree with it because I think an Arab is a person who has had to live within the society and be subject to the rules of certain cultural mores. For me, my mother tongue is English. And Arabic has been a very emotionally loaded jungle to sort of attempt to live inside of. And it was only when I went to Masr in the end, because I think Egyptians in particular and the language, Amiya is like much easier to enter. And also here, because of being segregated by gender, I only ever learned how to conjugate anything to a female. So it was a very confusing journey towards Arabi because I had no formal training, no Fusha until I was in my late 20s. So it is, however, very important to me to continue to study for the rest of my life. Edward Said famously didn't learn until he was in his 40s. So it's a very complicated subject, but it is so emotionally loaded and difficult to articulate, especially to Arabic Twitter.
Oh, I completely relate to that. My mother tongue is Arabic. I only spoke Arabic until I was 10. But I speak in an Egyptian dialect because that's where my mother is from. And I didn't move here until I was 12 or 13. And I found that it was really difficult. There was a lot of, I couldn't communicate in the local and the Khaliji dialect in general, and I still can't, which is why I usually speak in English. There's a bit of maybe an insecurity. I make my movies in Arabic and English because that is representative of my life. I do speak English most of the time, but I also speak Arabic and Egyptian, which is what you guys just saw. I also find that with English, there's a barrier that's broken with a Western audience. I mean, already the story could be so foreign. I mean, watching a story about someone like a Qatari family or a Khaliji family could be very foreign to someone who's never even heard of the country. But if you break that with the English, maybe, that they're more familiar with, then you instantly have a connection there. Yeah.
So I lived a very third culture kid experience between Amman and the States, Amman, Riyadh, the States, Dubai, always back and forth in my life. And I felt like, I read in English, and when I wrote in English. I felt like this is the language that I have mastered. I've mastered this language. I feel like I have a drop in the ocean of Arabi, you know? And you know, fairly, there are 600,000 words in the English language. Arabi, I think there's 12 million judur and 40 million variations. So when you think about that and the scope, I'm super humbled by that. I know that I'm gonna need lifetimes to be a poet بالعربي.
It would be worth it, I'm sure.
Yeah, it would.
So maybe this takes me back to this idea of the difference or the how words and visuals or the rest that accompany words complete each other. And for instance, Sophia, I know that your story is started with you like working at Mathaf, and then when you left, you did write this autobiographical book, The Girl Who Fell to Earth, and then you started. You decided to have an artistic practice as an artist. So, again.
I don't know if I decided. I sort of fell backwards into it. But all of these things have felt like sort of almost pulling teeth for me. The book, for example, I wanted to write YA fantasy, called Qasida actually, which was around poetry. It was my route into learning more about Jahiliya poetry, which I was obsessed with in university. Instead, my agent said, you know what'll really sell? You're an Arab woman. People are going to want to read it. And I hesitantly made a document that had an essay that I'd written in Badoon magazine, which was a very sort of ironic and jokey sort of version of a particular story around cars. And much to my surprise, it sold, and then I had to write this thing, which was extremely, it felt very much as if it was under duress. But I also I had to keep this light in my mind's eye that this was for the 12-year-old, the 13-year-old, the 14-year-old me, who was trying to navigate something that was really, really difficult in a terrain that was unmapped. I guess everybody probably feels that way as we move temporally through time. We are, after all, only three-dimensional, at least in this time-space continuum. But that was a very difficult process for me. But it was, I suppose, an origin story also because I highly recommend everybody writes a memoir so that you could let go of the past, even if it's just a journal. Maybe you don't have to publish it. Kind of sometimes wish I hadn't, but it's also brought me a lot of joy because a lot of people come to me and talk to me about it.
It's another way of, even maybe words you reveal yourself even more openly, like through a book like this.
Well, even the revelation is from a certain perspective. There's a lot that is also hidden. There is so much of the story that isn't told. The names are all changed, but that's the least of it, because in order to tell a story, you also have to. It's not necessarily the timing, the dates. It's not a history. It's a memoir. It's trying to speak to and reach people. And one thing that I was really happy about is that it was translated into Arabic, and I prefer the title in Arabic. It's Bain al-Ard wal-Sama', and like between the sky and the earth or the land, which feels more appropriate to me. And that has been actually the most rewarding thing for me, is that was possible.
I can hop on that question of visuals and language. Because my background was in theater, I always really relied on my presence, not so much all of the set and stage design, and that's when I pared down to poetry. It's really just about my presence, and sometimes I would use a scarf to transform from character to character, just as like a really simple prop. But obviously, when COVID hit, there were no live events, there was no theater attendance. All of a sudden, this thing that I had been delaying, which is, really recording the poems for the screen, I had nothing but time to do that. So the animation that you saw of Caged Bird, that was filmed just before lockdown started. It was February 2020. And we worked on it almost for an entire year, my husband and I. He was the animator, Rami. And through that year, we also made other poetry videos, both animated and live action, just to be more appropriate for the medium. Because, you know, I know that I can fill a space with my energy, but it doesn't quite translate on a screen when it's just like a talking head in a big black, you know, cave. So yeah, it's been an experience to also expand my visual vocabulary and stop thinking just in terms of the body, but start to think about how do you create a scene and how do you bring it to life using metaphor, not just in language, but through the visuals as well.
Yeah, I find that incredible because all of the movies that I've written or made have started with a single scene. And the movie has basically taken shape around that scene. They're very powerful scenes, and yeah, they're very visual as well. Like in this movie that I wrote that's being in production right now in Lebanon, there is a little girl who's walking on a beach, and she finds a shoe, like a little girl's shoe that's sparkling, but it's only one shoe. And this is a film about Syrian refugees, you know, who unfortunately many of them drowned when they were trying to get away. With Behind Closed Doors, which is going to be filmed next year, this scene that began the whole thing was of a little girl, 7-year-old girl who's taking a bath, a bubble bath. And her mom had been gone for a while, and her grandmother goes in there, and you immediately find that the grandmother and the granddaughter had this very strong bond, and physically the daughter is being taken away from her mother, and that just kind of explodes into this whole story. So it's interesting to kind of hear about how you guys use visuals to create your stuff.
Dana wanted to give us a performance. I think it would be great if you are ready to do it now.
Sure. The poem is called Risk, and I thought it would be appropriate for the Qatar Creates audience and for this panel just to maybe inspire you if there's something you're considering doing. Take this as your message. If you don't risk anything, you risk more. Because then, what has your life been for? No risk, no pain, no love, no gain. Each day just more of the same. As the suns set and the moons wane, will you build a legacy in your name? Because your skin was made to scab, meant to heal. You were built to try, meant to feel. Explore the worlds within and without. Make bold choices, banish doubt. You see, the risk itself is the reward. Put it all on the line. Feel open with no guard. Scale a mountain on your own. Courage is a love affair with the unknown. And when you find your way back home, and safely, you'll understand what it means to be free, the freedom to give it all, to lose the certainty. Well, that is the gift of being me. Because if you never try, then you'll never grow. You'll never have scars to show. You'll never know how far you'd go with all the skills you've come to know. Because to risk stability for a life of creation is a divine act, God's manifestation. It's easy to take. Society is built on consumption, but we who have the guts to make, we actually serve a function to all of humanity. We transcend identity and reflect the human experience so that others can connect with what they see. Art helps us feel understood by our community so that we can feel love and empathy, and we risk comfort to create and share as passionate, powerful human beings. Because your skin was made to scab, meant to heal. You were built to try, meant to feel. if you don't risk anything, you risk more. Because then, what has your life been for? What's your life for? Thank you. Some people ask me for the text of this poem. If you would like it, just send me a message, and I think my details are up there, and I'd be happy to send you a designed PDF with the text of the poem.
Maybe this is the right time to open the floor for like questions, comments, conversation with you.
Don't be shy.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for a really interesting panel. I had a question for Sophia about this exhibition. In the back room, you have the two screens that are telling this story from the beginnings of when Mathaf was being formed. And in a lot of ways, it becomes a collective story. It's thinking through multiple voices and trying to understand this institution. But you have it with headphones so that it is actually a really intimate experience. And I've been thinking about this exhibition and thinking about how to bring a group through and what that even means to go in it with a group. So I was hoping you could reflect a bit on how you thought through that choice to make it really only legible for one individual at a time.
Thank you for that question. I think listening to a video with headphones is a bit similar to reading a book. It's a very intimate experience unless perhaps you're having it read out loud. There is something that because they're very intimate pieces, to have them just playing within that space and also competing with one another didn't feel right. One of the videos is by Orlando Vicente Thompson, who used to work in the museum with me also. And it's a very intimate story with the voice of an interview of a security guard who worked here named Peter, who is an artist, and we're hoping to find him. So that should that work sell, then the proceeds, the artist portion can be shared with him. And in the case of the other one, again, it was so as not to compete, essentially. But if you were to bring people through, I'm not particularly precious about my video art pieces being shown in like a group setting or in any other way, because if it feels like it's something that you want, then get in touch.
So if there are no other questions or comments, I don't know if we need to have a conclusion to this panel. I wouldn't know how to do it. So if one of you has something to say that we didn't speak about, it's now or never.
No pressure, huh? Yeah.
No, bonjour. Well, thank you very much, first of all, because it's actually very moving listening to you, and I don't know, but if anyone shares that, but I had the feeling that we are walking on hot coal, you know, like it's very sensible and then sensitive at the same time, and wanted to thank you for that. But to a certain extent, you incarnate the three of you as you are, there, sitting, dressed, in your relationship with each others and others, and the one who are here, also incarnating a diversity of that Arab woman that you started all with, but yet not totally entirely defining either who she is or what is that Arab woman, or what burden it is, or what freedom it is, or what springboard it has been for you. And just maybe coming back to that very word that you use, the three of you, but not really maybe totally entirely addressed. And just wanted to hear you on that, because I think you are the proven presence of its multiple facets, which escapes precisely the very unique definition of burden that one would want to put on her. I don't know if it's that clear at all, but voila.
It's very difficult, I think, to think of it as a burden, because the only point of view or the only thing I can represent is myself, and I can barely do that. And it's very difficult also to, I mean, everybody, every type of person, everybody, I mean, what is the burden of being a white man or being perceived as a white man? It's a really complicated thing to like bear the weight of everything for. It's these like blanket, I try to interact with each person as an individual, and there should be a disclaimer on every conversation with me that I'm only representing myself, and again, barely.
Precisely, but you it's just, it's because you started with that. You acknowledged this as being a starting point, and yet, voila.
Because somehow this is what is often expected, you know, for who they are, and even me as a museum director, as someone working, you know, also being from the Arab world, working in the Arab world. I mean, this is always, it comes back, right? And this is why I started with it, saying that we cannot escape it. So let's finish with it, you know, start and finish with it.
I think the burden, if any, is like the burden of expectation that others may have for you out of their projections or their perceptions. And I think the journey of being an artist is the journey of really being okay with breaking those expectations and shedding all of those projections and saying, hey, this is my road to authenticity. This is what I have. This is who I am. Take it or leave it, accept me as I am, and then to be given the stage and a spotlight to say like, oh, hey, there it is. That's an Arab woman, and that's an Arab woman, and that's an Arab woman too, and none of these contradict each other or diminish each other in any capacity.
Yeah, I think because what we do is so different, but we're all defined, well, we all are women. It's a very strange thing to talk about. I feel like sitting up here. I feel very exposed and nervous because of where I am, I think, in my life right now. But it is all of these things that contribute to what, I mean, we don't have any other options, right? Like we are women, female artists who are going through, you know, I'm not just a woman, I'm a mother, I'm all these things that, I don't know, you just kind of peel away at this onion. Yeah, and this is what you get in terms, it's so different, but it's so. Yeah.
Reveal the human underneath. I think there's one last question over here, yeah?
Yeah. Hey, very, very inspirational panel. Thank you so much for your time. I guess my question is around narratives and reclaiming narratives. What is your advice to young Arab women and young Arab men by extension who live in the West or the Arab world on how to reclaim their narrative using the powers that be? So using the institutions within the government or the country that they live in, how do you navigate that? What is your recommendation or advice around navigating that to the point where we can reclaim our narratives?
I have advice. Be honest about your position and avoid being a native informant as much as possible. But especially be honest about your position in language, your position in the country, your relationship to your homeland or the land that you have ancestry from. And in the place where you've been planted, willingly or not, whatever country it might be in, be involved there. Because the sort of, the thing that I've witnessed in my generation, which I think is lessening with continuing generations, is this sort of way of, I guess, like using identity and identity politics as a way to like get a platform, sometimes in a way that doesn't actually engage with the place that your ancestors are from or the place that you are actually in. And I think that means that it's a much ado about nothing, and it doesn't have the political impact that it needs to have in order for conversations to happen.
It's almost like self-objectifying. It can be. I totally agree, and I think that one of the things that really helped me kind of figure myself out was to sit down and write this manifesto and say, what are my values as an artist? What are my values as a human being? What is it that I want to create in the world? What are my boundaries in terms of the stories that I will and won't tell? And once I had that kind of guideline, it became very clear to me, you know, at a glance, not interested. I am interested with conditions. This is what I need to change. And so, yeah, it became my kind of artistic compass to do this kind of manifesto work.
I think that you should find people that you can trust. Doing what we do, and the advice that you would give someone who's doing something similar, it can be a very lonely experience when whether you're writing or whether you're trying to tell a story or trying to connect with your heritage or what all of that means. It could be really comforting to find someone who relates on any kind of level, and that kind of gives you the confidence to maybe explore a little bit more, write a bit more, ask more questions, reach out, do some more research, read. I think reading is one of our biggest resources that a lot of us don't take advantage of, whether you're reading in English or Arabic, or it's so rich. But yeah, find your people.
Read like a butterfly, write like a bee.
Hello everyone, Assalamu alaikum. Sorry to keep you on hold. So today's session, I felt like there was a lot of points that were kind of addressing this notion of familiarity, audiences being able to access your work through personal triggers and shared identities. And thank you very much for that last question. I felt like Sophia kind of was able to talk about some of the questions that were floating in my head. I wanted to ask you all to perhaps just address briefly the relationship that you have between what you produce and how it converses with you, because I felt like a lot of the times these labels or molds or kind of the lens that we've been talking through today has been about you being Arab women and kind of coming forward with that label as the platform to kind of be able to talk about something. You as individuals, you as people who produce creative outputs from your thoughts and your personal experiences, what is your relationship with that? Do you not feel like that's also an intimate and important point to kind of resurface as artists and individuals only, and not individuals who come with those hashtags per se?
I think this is what Sophia said before, and so we end like we started. I don't know, Hend, you...
Yeah, I don't, again, I don't define myself as a woman. I know I am a woman, but when I sit down and write or make a movie or write a script or even write in my journal, I'm not doing it from that kind of perspective. I'm doing it as me, an individual who has had these experiences, and it just happens to be that I'm an Arab woman, and that's what it reflects. When I look back on some of the stuff that I did before, it doesn't reflect who I am now. It reflected who I was back then, and I can make peace with that and move on, because it can be really hard to kind of look back at your stuff, especially when it's really out there, because you want to change all this. You're like, that's not me now, that's not how I would do it now. But again, very personal, not defined by other people define it that way. But I think that for me personally, it has nothing to do with my gender. It just has to do with my own personal experience.
Definitely would like to agree with that. And also underline something that has been simmering in my belly this entire conversation, which is gender as a construct, and also that the word Arab is also people. And the perceptions of what Arab means, especially in the 21st century, and especially when we say it in English, is very loaded with a Western fearful gaze. So in a way, Arab is also, in that accent, is a construct. And sometimes dangerous one. But Arab is just people.
Something I know occurred to me when you were sharing your comment and your question, which is, what's my relationship to my works? For example, the Hajj, when I wrote her, she was 65. And then the next year I performed her, she was 66 years old, and then 67 years old, and now she's in her 70s. And so year on year, this character ages with me. And I've performed her at different times when there have been invasions of Gaza or attacks happening by settlers in Palestine. And so I've performed her in different emotional states. And there are moments, there was one performance in particular where I started crying. And it wasn't Dana the actress crying, it's Dana the human being is crying because, God, I'm sick of sharing this poem over and over again and nothing changing. And whether it's Palestine or climate change or refugee crisis or immigration or the industrialization of beauty, I still maintain that relationship to the topics that I write about. And sometimes it's frustrating to feel like I don't want to say this poem anymore. I don't want to keep talking about the tragedy that has befallen the Palestinian people anymore. And yet I know it's important to keep spreading the message kind of further and further.
So I just wanted to say, for those who didn't see the exhibitions yet, please do so, and we will be proposing a guided tour. So just stay at Mathaf, and thank you very much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you, Zeina, very much
Thank
for
you very
hosting
much.
us.